This topic is a bit of an outlier for this channel, but it turned into a lot longer and more articulate of a rant than I intended. So today, I wanted to talk about the increasingly confusing state of Facebook reposts. A couple of years ago, I made two videos on this channel, discussing the culture of Facebook trolls through a case example from my own feed, and how there's an increasing spread of not just misinformation, but complacency in the people reposting that misinformation. You can check out those videos, but I will warn you, the specific post that I break down is quite infuriating in its ignorance and racism. Now, first, I want to discuss why is this happening? The complacency and the misinformation, that is. Firstly, I think it's because Facebook feels like a bubble, and it's supposed to be more like a bubble than any other platform anyway. Your profiles aren't inherently accessible to anyone that's not your friends or family. Sure, unless you fully private it, any stranger can go snoop your page, but if they want to continuously see what you're posting, there's no good way to do that without going full e-stalker, because those posts won't automatically show up on their feed without a mutual connection. I guess Facebook is more like a web, a very small web, that only connects you to your friends and by proxy friends of their friends. But then there's Facebook groups. Facebook groups aren't the problem, but they are where the issue of spreading misinformation starts. Because for whatever reason, to the common person, Facebook groups have an air of legitimacy. Sure, anyone can make a group, but if you're in one with tens of thousands of other people in it, it must be good, right? The thing it posts must be true, right? Now, I'm not saying there's one God-given truth or ideation that we should all agree upon. Of course not. Every worldview should ideally be allowed its own space for free speech. The thing about Facebook groups isn't even necessarily that they need to be true, as I or anyone else sees it, specifically when it comes to political orientation or religious groups. The problem only arises when Facebook groups of a particular mindset create and facilitate narratives which imply a harmful subtext while presenting something uncontroversial on the surface. So it makes it easy for people to repost that content and feign ignorance over its implications. Facebook groups are echo chambers, but they're also not always blatant about it, and will create narratives to support their views rather than outright state their opinions, or positions. I'm going to make up a group, and what they're supposedly organized around compared to the actuality their viewpoints are enabling. So, here it is. Here's a Facebook group called Moms for Uniforms. It's a small group for parents, specifically geared towards mothers, advocating for the enforcement of school uniforms in their local district school board. That's the broad definition of the group. Of course, because of the demographic, there's also loads of personal stories looking for advice, general sharing of their children's achievements, and exchanging baking recipes. You know, mom stuff. Which is in of itself entirely innocent. 99% of what goes on in the group could be innocent, but it's the 1% that matters. The 1% that's nestled in among all the well-meaning posts that are the problem. Because if you agree with 99% of everything else in a group, you either pass by that one bad apple without registering it as harmful because you've assimilated the group's mentality as your own, or worse, you internalize that bad post because you are part of the group and that's how you think that you should be thinking too. And that's the thing. Groups write narratives, like I said. They hide their true intentions in the subtext. When Debbie makes a post to the Moms for Uniforms group complaining that the skirt length regulation at her child's school isn't being enforced, and oh, the poor young boys that have to traverse among these over-sexualized young tarts. Everyone is going to nod and agree because they're all there to advocate for uniforms, right? But nobody's going to look at it closer and question what Debbie's intentions are for enforcing uniforms. Because through her choice of language there, calling juvenile girls tarts, it seems like there's a distinct undertone of misogyny, and if the exposure of skin was truly her concern, she should be advocating for all students to wear shorts instead of upholding outdated gender norms and making the girls wear skirts at all in the first place. So hopefully you see what I'm saying, that it's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it. And if it's a post shared by a large conglomerate that you align with, you're not likely to question why they're saying it either. And that's just a light, stupid example that I made up. The actuality of Facebook groups is much, much worse. I have a lot of people in and around my extended Facebook circle with some very close-minded and non-progressive values, let's say, which would be fine, Well, not necessarily fine, but it would be better if they said what they believed and were forthright with their discrimination, so we're all on the same page. But instead, they're part of right-leaning Facebook groups that make generalized posts their followers don't see a problem with because they're not taking the few seconds needed to consider what's the actual narrative of the post they're resharing. And I get a lot of low-key, racist, ageist, sexist things show up on my timeline from people that if I pressed them for the true meaning of the post, they deny that they align with those definers, despite perpetuating that sort of rhetoric in the subtext of what they are constantly spreading. To them, because the post is from a group that shares their general sentiments, they think, of course, what it's spreading would continue to be in line with their beliefs. Of course, they would share it too. Facebook groups that adhere to a general mentality get away with posting misinformation that their followers then spread because they use that trust and inherent assumption that their followers are all the same and have the same interests at heart to post about things that they have no grounds to have an opinion on in the first place. As an actual genuine example, I've received an increasing influx on my feed over the last several months of people posting about how terrible electric cars are. P.S. I have an electric car. These are people who are my extended family, people who know absolutely nothing about electric cars, but feel empowered to reshare these misinformed posts because they got them from a Facebook group of otherwise like-minded folk. They don't need to know anything about the topic themselves, so long as the general consensus of the rest of the group is that electric cars are bad. It's the gospel then. They must be bad. And although they don't see it that way, they are blindly condemning me for something that they have no actual, personally sourced or founded information about. Facebook groups form opinions, and their followers accept them. And that blind trust that what the group is sharing has your best interests at heart over actually knowing anything about what information you're spreading is dangerous. Misinformation is dangerous, duh. Blindly following things is bad, duh. But the whole point of this video, much like the last one that I made, is to point out that it's not actually a big old duh at the time it's happening, you know? All this setup wasn't just to tell you that ideas are being formed and perpetuated without the people perpetuating them knowing it, or that these types of posts are necessarily getting sneakier, but they are getting more convoluted. They are getting convoluted to the point where if I asked the user what the post they're actually resharing means, they're not going to have an answer for me because there is no answer. Because these posts have devolved into not making sense. They're just spreading misinformation, intolerance, hate, but mostly fear. Fear of things that people don't know so they can justify not having to know better. Exhibit A, this silly little post. I made this whole video about this stupid, seemingly harmless post. Why? Because it shook me. Not in a shook like, oh my god, that's so terrible kind of way, in a, I am shook because this makes no sense kind of way. Maybe it makes sense to the person who posted it, because they approached and redistributed it from the viewpoint of someone who has been convinced electric cars are condemnable, which I also know because I know them, and I see all of the other half-informed things they share about electric vehicles. Adding this to the pile and painting the narrative they want, the narrative of justifying dismissing electric vehicles as any sort of change that the future might need. This post makes sense to someone who is scared of the current economic climate, who doesn't understand EV technology, who can't afford to switch to them even if they wanted to, so it's easier to construct the narrative that they aren't a viable solution and stick to the gas cars that they know, because they're scared. This post makes sense to someone who is not just fed up with gas prices, but is also so hopelessly caught in the system of owning and relying on a gas car, there's nothing for them to do but hate the alternatives on principle. It makes sense to them, in a twisted way, or they think it does, that it's serving their agenda. But does it even make sense? Does this post, in and of itself, make any sense? You know, technically, it's not wrong. Yeah, not having transports would effectively leave our current system of societal operations shut down. But what does this post want you to do? What's it alluding to? What's the call to action? Where a lot of posts by this individual are constructing an anti-EV narrative through the context of many misinformed and irrelevant facts about EV cars mounting to the condemnation of them, where does this fit into that? Maybe it feels like it should, because it's addressing the gas crisis, and siding with the vulnerability of the livelihood of truckers, but I'm left asking myself, and what? When we run out of gas for truckers, and what? And what? The echo chamber has echoed so long and distorted so many times. The people listening to and trying to repeat the echo have no idea what the original message was. Taking all of the things that I can assume about the intentions of the person who reposted this, based on my personal connection to them, if I was coming at this with a like-mindedness to them, I still don't know what their point would be. Are we supposed to magically lower gas prices for a non-renewable resource? Are we supposed to buy less gas so the truckers have more? Should I buy gas for the truckers? Are we buying gas for the truckers now? Are we setting up a petition for companies and governing bodies to regulate the distribution of gas to make sure the transportation industry's large machinery operators are prioritized? If it were the last one, sure. Yeah, go ahead and try and do that. Go do that. If anything, this post, if I had to guess, would be a call for the redesigning of the infrastructure we have that's dependent on truckers needing gas so our society can function to something more sustainable, like EV trucks or trains. But God knows that's not what the reposter would have wanted my conclusion to be. But that's what I'm really trying to point out here. These open statement posts going around in Facebook groups have become generalized to the point that it doesn't even apply to the narrative people want to be perpetuating when they repost it. In and of itself, this post is nothing but a pointless statement, but because it has refused to define itself, it's open to a plethora of different, even polarizing opposite interpretations. Everybody can look at it and get something different from it, but none of us are right, because it never had a point or a stance it was making in the first place. And that's all I wanted to talk about. It's kind of infuriating. I know that anybody watching this probably isn't the people that need to be told to read something and understand it before you go around spreading it. My viewers are the ones like me that are just absolutely baffled by the spread of nothingness, of misinformed posts that are trying to say something very poorly, so poorly that they kind of say the opposite of it. I don't need to tell you guys to please read things before you reshare them, but maybe send this video to someone else that you feel as though is doing that. Very, very passive aggressive little like, hey, stop that, quit that, or get off Facebook. A lot of people should just get off of Facebook, honestly. Anyway, yeah, this was a bit of a weird one. Let me know if you sympathize with this overwhelming Facebook problem, or you logged off years ago and have never looked back because I envy you. Anyway, thank you. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.